So over a 70-year history, and there have been countless salespeople that have worked for Cutco, including, and I got to throw Hal Elrod under the bus here, you're the top seller of Cutco knives. So tell us that story. How did you become so good at it?
Yeah, well, like a lot of things, I fell into it. I wasn't a salesperson. I didn't, even to this day, I still don't consider myself a salesperson, but I was a farm boy. I grew up in Ohio milking goats every morning, and I wanted to pay for med school. I was going to get out of Dodge. I hated baling hay and heating our house with wood. And a buddy of mine who was a seminary student went and started selling these crazy knives. And I'm like, if Steve Wiggers, who couldn't sell, a cup of water to somebody in the middle of the desert, can sell knives, I can at least try. So I was like, I'll give it 4 weeks. I went in, I did 40 appointments in my first 10 days, and my life really shifted and changed. The reason I sold so much knives was because of my girlfriend's dad. And it wasn't because he bought so much. It was because he was he was actually an attorney. He owned a small law firm in town. And he was the guy that would like find a deal on noodles and buy everybody at church the next Sunday, like, a year's supply of noodles, like 200 people. And I'd be like, Paul, that was 40 grand. Are you nuts? And he's like, John, that's just who I am. He just showed up radically generous for people. And so he was the most liked, trusted, and top of mind person in that town. So I pitched him the idea of giving away Cutco pocket knives to all of his clients because they're men. They own, insurance companies and lumber yards and financial advisor firms, that kind of stuff. And they're all into the outdoors. And Paul would change my life forever. He's like, I don't want to order 100 of these. These are $100 pocket knives, not like crappy 50-cent ones from China. These are like not promotional product knives. Cutco's handmade in New York. He's like, John, I want to order 100 of the $100 and $200 paring knives. I'm like, you want to give a bunch of grown men dudes that are CEOs and influencers of million and billion dollar companies like a kitchen tool? That's weird. Why? And I'm 20 at the time. And it's 20 years ago, literally. I remember sitting at the kitchen table before church, and he's like, John, in 35 years in business, the reason I have more referrals, deal flow, access, you name it, is if you take care of the family in business, everything else takes care of itself. So it was this mind-blowing moment where I understood it wasn't about the knives, although to this day, we still sell millions of dollars of the stupid knives. The knives were a delivery vehicle for an emotion. And most people would check the box and send crappy stuff at Christmas. Paul was loving on these people year round. So I started to pitch insurance companies and whatever else. I would send them like a $300 Cutco carving set on my own dime. I wasn't buying beer, I was buying knives. And I'd engrave the CEO's name, spouse's name, and I put a little handwritten note inside that said, carve out 5 minutes for me, I promise to be with your time. Because if I called them and said, hey, I want to sell you knives, no, it'd be click. But because I used this as a tool, as kind of like a process, I would get the meeting with these like 60-year-old dudes running million and billion dollar companies. And they'd take the meeting. I wear my one suit I have on into these boardrooms. And they'd be like, I thought you were going to be like some 55-year-old seasoned sales executive. And I would walk in nervous, and they're like, are you here? The guys are like, are you here to sell me knives? And I'm like, no, I'm here to help you and your 1,000 sales reps do exactly what I did to you, to your top 10,000 relationships, your referral sources, centers of influence, your employees. And their jaws would hit the ground. They'd be like, you're good. And I would walk out of these meetings with POs. And Cutco is a $250 million company, but they sell it really one knife set at a time. I would sell 1,000 knife sets as a business tool. And so nobody could compete with me. I'm this country bumpkin farm kid who is basically teaching these business leaders and VPs of business development and lawyers and financial advisors and home builders how to use gifting and gratitude and generosity as a way to grow their company. And nobody had ever seen anything like it. To this day, nobody's ever seen it. So the reason we're number one out of 1.5 million wasn't on accident, but in some ways it was. It was taking a product and using it as a solution in a way nobody had ever seen before.
There are so many takeaways here, and I'm trying to think of where to start. But one of the things I loved is you totally activated all of these individuals became your sales force essentially, because they all had customers. So everything compounded. So anybody that was trying to go one-to-one, I mean, you just blew them out of the water. I love that. The other thing you mentioned was getting your foot in the door. So you totally stood out. You weren't just 100%. Picking up the phone, begging to get an appointment.
No, most people, they'll send like a shoe to get their foot in the door. They'll send some candies. You send somebody a handmade cutlery set with their name engraved and their wife. A lot of these guys were married dudes, and they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60 years old. it's one thing to do something nice for the decision maker, whether that's the employee, the client, the center of influence. But every industry is like a good old boys club. Hey, let's go hunting. Hey, let's go for golf. Hey, let's go for bourbon. Here's your case of wine. You start including somebody's assistant, what I call the inner circle. And I learned that from Paul. He treated the receptionist or the janitor, oftentimes the receptionist is a woman. He treated her with this, not as a tactic, not as a sleazy. He treated her with the same amount of respect that he treated the CEO. And so we call it the inner circle. I take care of a lot of the reason we still do knives or home related things versus bourbon and wine and golf is I want to include the spouse. I want to include the family. I want to include the assistant. And most people, it's like, they're lucky to even be talked to with respect, let alone like included with their name engraved into the pieces. And so the amount of times we help clients get deals, not because of the cool thing we gave to the guys or the executive, if it's a woman, it's their spouse. Their spouse sells the deal. Their spouse is like, that's how people are like, John, like your gifts seem kind of like cheesy. And I'm like, it's how I can help somebody spend $100,000 and somebody else spends $10 million. And we help the client that spent $100,000 win against their bigger competitors because we were more thoughtful and strategic with the dollars that we were investing, whether it's $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, doesn't matter. Most people, they follow the same stupid playbook that everybody does, and they're not memorable. They're just checking a box at the holidays, or they're just doing the same thing they've been doing for the last 30 years.
Yeah, 100%. So, and I want to jump into the tactics in a moment, but before we jump into that, so at what point in that transition do you realize, hey, like I'm on to something, I'm doing something different? At what point did you say, hey, this is a full-blown business? And when did the Ruhlin Group start?
Well, I started the Ruhlin Group within 3 weeks. When I sold Paul that first round of, $10,000 in gifts, I was like, this is like, I would much rather go sell to business owners because they have disposable income. They like quality. They like US made. They, most of them are married. And if I sell them on a, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 knife set for themselves personally, and they like me, then I can come back around 6 months later and pitch them on the idea of giving this to their 75 employees or their 150 centers of influence or their referral sources. So it was like I was double dipping. So I realized really early on, I'm not going to, I could actually graduate college, pay for, a private Christian school, Malone University, have no debt, and have money banked to go pay for med school. But about a year into it, a lot of the other Cutco reps made fun of me. They're like, dude, just go follow the program. Can't you just follow the program? And I'm like, I am following the program, but I'm adding this addition thing. And I kept telling them, I'm going to sell this, I'm going to do this business thing. And everybody thought it was stupid. But about 18 months in, things started to click. It took 18 months because I'd tell people, like, I thought everybody was going to be like Paul, the law firm, but not everybody was that much of a giver. Not everybody was that generous. So I was still selling a lot of knives, but it was more personally. But I was planting these seeds along the way. But about 18 months in, when we had this national sales contest. There's like 60,000 other reps, and we freaking crushed everybody by like, they had all done like 100 appointments. I did 30, and I did 10 times the amount of business. And I was like, you know what? Like, there's no gifting agency. Like, yeah, you can buy from Harry & David's or Amazon gift cards. Those are not gifts. Those are like promotional products. There was really no agency teaching people how to do this and think about this and coach them and their teams through it. And there definitely was nobody that was like a done for you service where, we'd handwrite, like to this day, we still handwrite all the notes for everybody. Like, so I realized by the time I was a junior in college, I was like, med school and $500,000 in debt is getting put on hold permanently, and really started to say, like, this could be a real business. And then when I graduated college, I'm like, I'm just going to roll with it and see if it continues to work. And of course, there's been evolutions to that, like what we were doing 20 years ago, like we have shifted it. But a lot of the core basic principles that I learned early on haven't changed that much. There's like maybe a little bit different window dressing, but the root things, because a lot of it's based in wisdom that's existed for thousands of years. People have just forgot about it. So I would say it's been an evolution. Early on, I was like, I'm not going to call myself the Cutco Knife Company. I'm going to call myself the Ruhlin Group as an agency, because nobody cares about knives. Nobody really even cared about gifts, but they all cared about referrals and access and deal flow and retention and all of that stuff. And those were things that business owners were willing to pay a lot of money for.
100%. And let's dig right into there to your big philosophy, the gifting around the recipient. And I'm not trying to hate, because I appreciate this gift, but I just happen to have in arm's reach. I wanted to just kind of show something and tell me what you see here.
A little water bottle with somebody's logo on it.
Yeah. So tell me why it would be better. Let's talk about the gifting for the recipient.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. If you've, Yeti cups, like I can list off like the 10 worst gifts to avoid giving. And one of the reasons they're the worst is if you already gotten like the amount of people that are like, their spouses are like, if you come home with another freaking coffee mug or water bottle, I'm going to shove it someplace that you don't want it. And because your cupboards are just cluttered. Like during the pandemic, the amount of people that have gone to Goodwill and they stood and like literally drove in like a mile-long line, because in America, we don't need more stuff. We don't need more promotional products, more tchotchkes. And that's what most people do is they're like, oh, cups are a good idea. Let's go order 1,000 of them, slam our logo on them and give them out to everybody. And you're giving them out to oftentimes like people that are making 5, 6, 7 figures. Do they really want a cheap Chinese piece of crap with your logo on it? No, they want one really amazing one with their name on it. Like we don't allow our clients, we work with pro sports teams, but a lot of our clients are small and mid-sized companies. Do they really want, XYZ accounting firm on their Yeti mug? No. And they'd rather have their family name, their last name, maybe their favorite quote if they're into faith or scripture. So the amount of people that just like look around and say what's hot, cool, and sexy and give Apple devices or give Amazon gift cards, like people, and the amount of people that will email me or be like, John, you're so mean. It's the thought that counts. And I'm like, tell your wife that when you buy her something for Christmas. Like, it's the thought that counts, honey. No, it's the thoughtful thought that counts. That's an excuse to give a lame, crappy gift when people say it's the thought that counts. It's not the thought that counts. It never, like, relationships, determine whether somebody's successful in business or not. And if you show up at a mediocre level to show appreciation to the relationships that matter in business or personal, then you're going to have a sucky life, because relationships don't thrive when you kind of mail it in and kind of go halfway. They thrive when you go all in. So your mug or your coffee cup or your, even, the knives, if people put their stupid logo on handmade $5,000 knife sets, nobody wants your logo on it. That seems like the cheesiest, tackiest thing in the world. Like I've seen people give Rolexes out and they're like, how could you give a $10,000 watch wrong? Well, Domino's did it. They put on the Air King, white face of the Air King, they put the Domino's logo on it. Even if you work for Domino's and make millions of dollars, do you really want a Rolex staring you in the face every day? Like, give a watch with somebody's name on it, give a knife, give a whatever, make it all about the recipient. And guess what? Subconsciously and consciously, they'll never forget where it came from. The reason people put their crappy logo on stuff is because they're like, well, John, every marketing and branding book says I better get mileage out of this. And I'm like, you're actually going to spend money to piss off, annoy, or frustrate people. Is that a good equation? Give a world-class gift, make it all about them, and they will never forget where it came from if you follow the recipe. Most people don't know what the recipe is. They want to cut the corners. They want to think they're doing giftology, and they're actually spending money to have a negative consequence. So they're not doing giftology at all. It's like baking bread and deciding you're going to leave out yeast. Guess what you don't freaking get? You don't get bread. Like, I don't care how many times you do it. I don't care how much money you spend on it. If you leave out that one ingredient, you don't get bread. And if you don't follow the recipe when it comes to giftology, then don't expect relationships that are going to thrive and refer you business and open doors for you and run through walls for you as employees, because you missed some of the secret sauce that allows for somebody to say, wow, this person knows me, thought of me, and actually cares about me, versus, oh, they just wanted to automate this and send me some crap and stuff in the mail. Not the same, not even close, not even on the same planet.
I love the passion. It's 100% true, though. We want something that means something to us. It's about the recipient. And, I received some Cutco knives, and I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and it had, May the Force be with you on it. So they obviously did their homework, and every time, even though it doesn't even have my logo on it or anything, my name, my fan, I know who sent it to me, and every single time we use them.
Of course. I mean, people get wedding gifts. If you think about it, if you got married, I've been married 11 years. Like, there's certain things that when I pick it up, there's no logo on it, like on a wedding gift. But if it's a crappy, cheap gift, then put your logo on it. But if you're going to try to deepen a relationship and inspire somebody, whether it's a personal relationship or business relationship, go all in and give something that's unique and amazing and practical and useful. And, and if you do that, decades later, they'll still be thinking about, and if it's used daily, over the course of a decade, like that's 3,600 times. Like, everybody wants to be liked, trusted, and top of mind. If you give a really thoughtful gift, like a Rolex, like I have a buddy who sends out Rolexes a lot, and we do all the execution and fulfillment for that. And, like, people are like, man, that's a lot of money. I'm like, 10 grand to influence somebody that could be worth hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. Like, that's the best equation on the planet. I'll spend 10 grand to make $1 million all day long. Like, that's the best ATM machine. Put in $1 and get $100 back. But they've never been challenged to think that way, to say like, hey, this person's into Star Wars. Let's make sure that we engraved some really cool things into the pieces or into the product or into the whatever to make that person smile and light up and get excited and go seek out and find that piece that it connects to them at this deep visceral level. Like, we're all just humans. Like, we forget in 2020, even during the pandemic, like, we've realized our humanity even more. Like, we're just human beings. We like things, we have hobbies, we have people we care about, we have things we like to do, we break bread and eat together. Like, there's some things that are just so simple, but I think like in this like digital world of like Facebook ads and TikTok and all this other stuff, like a lot of the old school stuff that our great grandfathers would have done naturally, like it becomes even more important because people have lost sight of how to really build relationships.
I 100% agree. And there's a couple things that I really have struggled with. And I kind of wanted to speak because I really think it applies to our audience. So our audience is mostly personal injury attorneys, and they don't know when the next person's going to get in a car wreck. Right? So if you're going direct to consumer, and I know there's strategies behind maybe they don't try to go direct to consumer. Maybe it's at peers for referrals. How would you approach gifting when you don't know who your end consumer is going to be?
Yeah, well, I would say most people come to us with their Dream 100 or Dream 1000 or their prospect list. Whether they're doing $1 million in revenue or whether they're doing $1 billion in revenue, everybody wants to fill the boat with new blood. Like, they want to go whale hunting. That's just instinctually, especially as type A leaders, it's like, hey, we got to go get more stuff. But what we found is taking our clients that get the best results spend 80% of their marketing biz dev overall relationship building budget on their warm market, people that there's already a fire there. And the reason is like, Cameron Harold's a great example, somebody that I met, through EO, a CEO group. And I ended up finding out like he was coming. I wanted him as a client, a mentor, an advisor, a referral source. And I was going to take him to a basketball game and a dinner, and his response was the most underwhelming response ever. So I found out he was coming to town and he loved Brooks Brothers. So I ended up outfitting his hotel room with $7,000 in Brooks Brothers. I already had the relationship, but it wasn't deep. It was like 1 inch deep. So I do the Brooks Brothers, melt his face off. He's like almost in tears. He's like, whatever you want to talk about for as long as you want to talk about it. After that, for a decade, every quarter I sent him a gift. I built him a $5,000 knife set. I did custom leather goods. He's into wine, so we did this crazy $700 wine tool with his autograph. And people are like, John, you already had him after the Brooks Brothers experience. Why did you continue to send gifts? And I'm like, because I wanted to, not because I had to. And when you do things because you want to and pour gasoline on the fire that's already burning, Cameron, I did the math. It's I invest 20 grand. He's referred over 7 figures. All of his clients get referred to us. They get a book, Giftology book. It's one of the few books he sends out. He mentions me from stages. We've spoken on some of the biggest stages in the world. Before I had a book or anybody knew who I was, and I was begging to speak for free, Cameron would get double booked and say, you got to book John Ruhlin. And he'd get me a $15,000 speaking gig when I had no book because he sold. Like, I couldn't have hired Cameron for $2 million a year to be my sales rep. For 20 grand over a decade, I got him to sell on my behalf. 20 grand. You can't even hire an assistant for 20 grand. I get one of the top business coaches in the world selling on my behalf for a decade. And it's produced a 50x ROI. I call it return on relationship, ROR. you can't get a 50x in any other part of your business other than through human beings. So my recommendation is to take, for a lawyer, for a professional service firm, for a financial advisor, take all of your centers of influence that already like you or love you and pour gasoline on the fire there. And then take the people that you've already worked with that already have paid you money, and you should be loving on those people. Why? Well, we all have a circle of influence of, dozen people, a couple hundred people oftentimes. So that person's probably not going to get another car wreck again or another whatever, but they know people, they're at the country club or they're at the whatever. And you want somebody who's passively loyal, who sits on their hands and doesn't do anything for you, that just was your client or your center of influence? Or do you want an actively loyal person who's actually looking for opportunities to talk about you? That's Cameron. I'll take one Cameron over 1,000 people that are passively loyal, because Cameron's actively loyal. He's going out of his way at dinners, ball games, on stages to talk about John Ruhlin and Giftology. He's actively selling on my behalf. And so to me, if I don't care the industry, lawyers are the same, because it's just like, where does their business come from? It comes from other humans. Like when I spoke at Google, they're like, somebody raised their hand, like, John, does this work in technology? And I laughed, and I'm like, are there human beings here? And they're like, yeah, like 60,000 of them. I'm like, well, then it works, because it's a human to human thing. And so my recommendation would be, yeah, you could, take care of your centers of influence, whether that's other lawyers, whether that's other doctors, whatever, and do things because you want to, not because you had to. Everybody says they're in the relationship business, and the only time they give gifts are transactional. They give a gift after a deal's done. They give a gift after a referral's given. I'm like, you just turn that relationship into a transactional tit for tat. You give me $1 million referral, here's your $500 bottle of wine. Does that feel good? No, it feels unequal. It feels icky. It feels gross. It feels very tit for tat. Whereas if you started sending out sucky gifts to people just because you were thinking of them, they'd be like, wow, I didn't do anything for this person. Like, why are they sending me this? Internally, as human beings, whether you believe in a God or not, like we're wired, our DNA is wired to want to reciprocate. That's just how we've been built as humans. And so if you start taking care of the people that already like or love you, and consistently, in our system, we do once a quarter, so it doesn't feel like, Chevy Chase's Jelly of the Month Club. That's what most people are like, John, let's put this on autopilot. Let's send Harry and David pears every month. And I'm like, dude, relationships, even if you want to automate something, it can't feel automated. If it feels automated, then it doesn't have a thought to it. And if it doesn't have a thought to it, then you might as well go light $100 bills on fire, because it just feels like it does feel like a relationship. So for lawyers, the same advice I give to lawyers is the same advice I give to the Chicago Cubs. It's have a plan, reinvest in the people that are already spending money with you or could spend money with you or have spent money with you in the past, versus always like looking over. It's like being married and looking at the chick across the table. Like that's like you're looking across, like the grass is greener on their side. No, take care of the people that are in front of you and love on those relationships. And if you do that, you won't have to prospect very much, because those people are going to go sell on your behalf.
That's incredible. And I was immediately thinking of your very first story of the competition. So you had 40 appointments and you blew them out of the water, and the other people were just 10x, not contextualizing, just smiling and dialing, right?
Yeah, but there's a place for that if you're just getting off the ground. But at the end of the day, Gary Vaynerchuk and all these people, Gary's made it very popular to say, I play the long game. He actually does. Most people's long game is days, not decades. But if you're going to be in business for decades, you should be building relationships as such. Like, it's a marathon. Like, you should be showing up for people, and oftentimes when you show up for people in year 3 and year 7, it's like a marriage. Like, if you tell your wife, if you do everything amazing for the wedding and the honeymoon, and then you fall off a cliff, you're not going to have a great marriage. Like, I can attest, I got 4 daughters. Like, if I don't keep dating my wife and showing up for her, then I'm not going to have a wife. And you see it all the time. Like, people take people for granted. We tend to take our current clients and our current centers of influence. We're like, oh, John, I don't have to do it. They already like me. And I'm like, it's not doing it because you had to. It's doing it because you wanted to. It's doing it because you appreciate them. It's doing it because you would like them to continue to be loyal to you, actively loyal on your behalf. And if you want to keep having to fill your boat that has a bunch of holes in it, and it's leaking water everywhere, I would rather plug the holes in the boat and keep the people that are in the, and I'm not perfect at it. Like I'm not, like there's not times, it's not like there's not times where I don't take somebody for granted. Or my wife would be the first to tell you, John, sometimes you suck at gifting me. Like you made the gift about yourself, or you didn't like think about what I really wanted or whatever. Like, but there's also times where, you know, we knock it out of the ballpark. And I think that most people have marketing plans and operations plans and financial plans. If you ask most business owners, whether that's a lawyer or whether that's the Chicago Cubs, like, what's your relationship plan? How are you laying out for the next 5 years, not just your business plan? What are you going to do for your relationships? And how are you making it a math equation where you're reinvesting a percentage of your profits back into your relationships to keep them, grow them, and turn them into sales reps? And I don't care, most companies, 1 out of 1,000 will say, yeah, we have a relationship plan. Here's what it is. The other, 999 have 0. They're like, well, we do Christmas gifts, we do anniversary gifts. And I'm like, that's table stakes, man. Like, if you only do things for your wife on anniversaries, birthdays, and Christmas, like that's like just to keep you at 0 versus going into negatives. And in business, it's the exact same way. Like, if you don't have a plan on how you're going to show up, and not like, hey, here's a koozie, here's a thing of peanut brittle, but like real stuff, then somebody else who does have a plan on how they're going to love on those relationships are going to take them away from you. That's just the bottom line. Or you're leaving millions of dollars on the table because they're not going out of their way to refer the level of deals that they could. They're doing it when it falls into their lap and somebody point blank says, hey, who did you use for X, Y, and Z? They're like, oh yeah, I use so-and-so. They're good. Versus,
right.
You have to use these guys. I'm going to call them. I'm going to make sure that you get connected to the founder, the owner, the whatever. Like, you have to use them. There's a big difference between lackadaisical referrals and active referrals, and most people don't realize it's very haphazard. It's very on accident.
Yeah, and I was thinking of Joey Coleman, Never Lose a Customer Again. He talks about, you're dating, you're taking them out, you marry them, and then it's like, oh, here's the new account manager. And you hope that they treat the individual the same because it's relationship driven. And so let's talk about the gifts to just avoid. Like, what are some of the worst gifts and that I mean, we talked about the cheap mugs, the stuff that's just not, that people don't want. They have hundreds of them.
Yeah. Well, I think that that we have a top 10 list, and we have kind of like a download where your tribe can go download our entire plan of who to send gifts to, when, why, how much should they invest, how frequently should they give. They can get that. We charge thousands and tens of thousands of dollars to lay out a plan for a company, depending upon the size of the company. They can go to Giftology system and download that. And part of that is the 10 worst gifts to avoid giving. And people, when they get it, they're like horrified because they're like, John, you're like, this is what I've done for the last 27 years. Like, most of the time they're like, how did you know what I was giving? I'm like, because everybody follows the same playbook. But just, in case they don't have time to go download that, gift cards, the worst. Why? It's basically saying, I don't know you well enough. Here's a piece of plastic, go buy your own gift. Like, it doesn't connect to your spouse. It's definitely not going to connect to your clients. It's easy, but what's thoughtful is not typically easy. It takes energy and effort and resources. So gift cards, the worst. I hate consumables. People are like, John, everybody loves to eat. And I'm like, well, first off, most people give consumables between Thanksgiving and Christmas when people are already eating and drinking themselves to death. So it's one of 47 things sitting on the conference table or the kitchen table with peanut brittle and brownies and bottles of bourbon and scotch and wine. Like, lawyers are the worst. They give alcohol like it's going out of style. You can only, you send somebody red wine and they like white, or you send somebody white wine and their wife likes red, or you send wine to somebody and their dad's an alcoholic, or maybe they're on keto or paleo, or they're trying to lose weight. You're basically sending them gift guilt. They're off sugar, their kid's gluten-free. They're like, there's so many ways you can piss off and annoy somebody with food or drink. But even if they love it, like any other part of marketing, you measure cost per impression, whether it's a Facebook ad, whatever else. How many eyeballs are seeing it? How many eyeballs are seeing the billboard? If you give a gift and you think, oh, John, I spent $50 on the bottle of wine. It's so much cheaper than your $500 knife set. In the short term, but I'm playing the long game, and so are you, whether you realize it or not. They drink that $50 or $500 bottle of wine. How many impressions did you get? 1. They drank it, pissed it down the drain. It's gone, forgotten about. You thought you saved money. I send them, one of our clients sends them something. They use it once a day for the next year. That's 365 impressions in 1 year. Who's going to get the referrals in the deal flow? The person who's most liked, trusted, and top of mind. Oftentimes, the reason you don't get the referrals that you want is you're not top of mind. The average human is getting 30,000 messages at them a day between Facebook ads, TikTok, text messages, emails, Facebook messages. We all have digital overload. So we can only process so many things. So unless you're the first person that somebody thinks of when they wake up and go to bed at night, then you're not going to get the deal. You're not going to get the referral. And so I want to make sure, as I'm thinking strategically, I'm not giving them something that they're going to sit on a shelf somewhere and forget about and collect dust. I'm not going to give them something that they're going to use once a year. I want something that they're using once a day or maybe 3 times a day. That's why to this day, the stupid knives have played so well, is because most people, especially right now with COVID, they're cooking 30,000% more. They host people, they entertain people, they're cooking for their kids, for their spouse. For me, one of our secret sauces is anything that goes into the kitchen is like this crazy special secret sauce. Why? Most people have a kitchen. And right now I'm actually living in Austin for a couple months, and this is our guest quarters. So I'm not in my normal studio. People are like, John, where are you at right now? I'm like, no, I'm not in St. Louis right now. I'm traveling. I went on an adventure with my 4 daughters to go check out some entrepreneurial schools. So this isn't my normal place, but every home, even a little apartment, has a kitchen. People still eat in 2020. People still break bread. So I think anything that basically communicates either unthoughtfulness, that's consumed and forgotten about, has the potential to piss off or offend, or anything really that has a logo on it. I don't like apparel, because what if somebody loses weight? Or what if, most of the time you're putting a logo the size of a softball on it? Nobody wants your logoed whatever. Even Lululemon, I'm not wearing it if it has your logo on it. Why? Because most affluent people can go buy their own Lululemon or Rhone or Under Armour or whatever you think the cool brand is. And so I want to do something for them that they didn't even know existed, or that they wouldn't necessarily go buy for themselves. And I almost always, 80% of our budget is taking care of that inner circle. And family is a very difficult thing to include. So anytime I can tie in the family and avoid the typical, people will say, John, I want to do Apple. And I'm like, you're going to give them, spend $1,000 on an iPad or an whatever. And 6 months later, the new version comes out. So that's out the door. And most people already have their Apple-sized device or color or whatever else. So you're going to spend a bunch of money, feel cool and sexy, but really those things are going to get regifted, or at best case scenario, they're going to be outdated in 6 months. I want something that, 16 years later is still marketing for me, that's still deepening that relationship. That to me is how you can spend less money than your big publicly traded competitors and destroy people, as being more thoughtful and creative than they are, versus just following the same stupid list that everybody follows.
So I'm about to ask you a question on a particular gift, and I think you already answered my question here. But most of our personal injury attorneys listening are really into Peloton, Peloton bike, Peloton treadmill. And I was considering, that Dream 100, gifting a Peloton. And I was thinking, hey, they would go down there, they'd exercise, and I wouldn't put their logo, but they'd get on it. But then I started thinking, man, would they be pissed off every time they went by it? Felt guilty, kind of like the alcohol thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that if you had somebody that, there's certain things that as a one-off, you may find out that somebody loves this certain kind of wine that you can't get access to. Every rule that we put together, there's a rule to, there's an anomaly to break it, but it's usually as a one-off. If you want to scale thoughtfulness, it's hey, how can I play the odds and I can send something to 100 people or 1,000 people and have, 85% of them be just blown away. There's going to be 15% or 5% or 2%. You could send, 100 Lamborghinis, and there's 2 of them that are just a-holes that would complain it's the wrong color. So you're trying to play the odds. So for the Peloton, most people that want a Peloton have bought it, or they bought it, or their wife bought it, or husband bought it. And so something like that is cool, but it's also there's a guilt associated to it, or you're gonna drop, $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 on something that somebody already has. that's why we try to find something that they don't even know existed, or we personalize it in such a way. Like we just did a gift for Tony Robbins for a client. Tony can buy 10,000 knife sets if he wanted to. He's got homes all over the world. So the knives weren't the thing. We took the knives, this $5,000 knife set, we put it inside a wood box. It cost $2,000. It was this called a strong box. And every knife, there's 32 knives, had a different quote of wisdom carved into the blade of his that he had spoken over 40 years. So it was really it was an heirloom and legacy play of saying, hey, be reminded of the wisdom you've poured out into the world. And someday your kids or grandkids are going to fight over this set that's been used because, not because of the knives, you could buy your own knives. It's because of what they represent, and the wisdom that's here reminds you and your future generations of what you put out into the world and what matters. And so the item was really just a delivery vehicle for this emotional connection. Now I've used that same knife play with authors. I've used it with CEOs where we'll get their quotes that they've spoken on stages. And almost every single time there's tears involved where people are like, this is like my life, my legacy carved into these pieces that, you know, I would never go buy a $5,000 knife set. And now like me and my kids, and if they're a person of faith, it's their scripture verses, but most people would say, John, that's a great idea. And then they go buy like some Target set for $200 and they, you know, it's made in China, and they buy this like mediocre or mid-level gift. And then they try to replicate what we're doing. It's like, it's not just the engraving, it's the quality of the item. It's the handwritten note that goes with it that provides context. It's the case that has the custom video screen that provides the meaning and the cool story. So many times people will latch onto the idea, and they're like, they latch onto the widget. And I'm like, it's not the widget. It's what you're doing with the widget. It's like anything else. Like the way I package my book, I have a $200 version of my book that comes in a leather bag inside a linen box. There's 30,000 books published on Amazon every week. That's the number, 30,000. I wanted my book to stand out from every other book that's ever been published. And a $200 book, you know, like blows people away. A $200 bar tab that you pick up doesn't blow anybody away. Still the same $200, but it's how you're investing those $200. And so circling back to your Peloton comment, I think that there's probably somebody on your Dream 100 list where you could melt their face off with a Peloton. But there's also probably maybe 80 of them that already own it, or they'd be like, dang, what am I supposed to do with another Peloton? I already have one. And now you're creating like an obligation to say thank you, and a guilt, and oh, frick, what am I going to do? I don't need 2 Pelotons. And so that's where people latch onto the widget, and they don't put their mind share of strategy into it to say, cool idea, but probably isn't scalable.
Right. That makes sense. The artifact that they can't get, the cutting board, the knives, the stuff that's just going to stay around forever. No one throws away a cutting board.
Not if it's a best-in-class charcuterie board that has their favorite quotes engraved on the back with their family name carved into a piece of it. Most people are like, oh, this is good enough. And they'll give like this little carving board with their logo on the back, or they'll carve some big, huge letter into it, and then it's not even usable. Or it's like, you know, when you're gifting to the athlete, you have to think like, either gift best in class. Like, you're not going to go give like a knockoff Peloton. You're either going to give a Peloton or not. Most people are like, oh, the bike idea, that's good, but I don't want to spend $3,000 for it. There's one at Costco for $300. And so they send a bunch of people the Costco version, and people say thank you out of obligation. But guess what happens to that $300 that they were so proud of? It ends up at Goodwill. It ends up getting regifted to somebody else. And they'll never tell you that, because that feels rude. Like, hey, I thought less of you as a human when I got your $27 bottle of wine. But that's what goes through people's heads, because like it's basically a tangible representation of how much value you place on the relationship. Like whether that's personally or professionally. And if you cut corners, then you're basically saying, you kind of matter. You kind of are important. Like, is that really what you want to communicate? Like you're like you make the B team, you make the junior varsity team. Like, no, we all want to feel like we're VIP. I don't care who it is or what industry you're in. And so that's where people all the time, like, I would much rather invest $300 in one knife than to give somebody a $3,000 watch when they already have a $30,000 Rolex on their wrist. You could spend $3,000 on a watch or $300 on a watch or whatever. And if you're not giving something that's best in class that really has meaning to it, you're just spending money to sound important or to look important. But if it's not a best in class item for that person, then you're wasting money. And that's where people don't think through, is this best in class? Is this personalized the right way? Did I put the right handwritten note with it? Like, that's why an agency like ours exists. It's not because like the secret sauce is out there. Like, it's in our book, it's in our downloads, but it's executing that consistently and not cutting corners. That's where people are like, they'll spend all this time to make this, it's like making lobster bisque, and they'll spend 12 hours to make it, and then they didn't pay attention and a fly flies into the soup. Like, nobody remembers that you spent 12 hours to make this beautiful bowl of lobster bisque. What do they focus on? Just the little fly, the little hair that was in the soup. It's the little thing that if you either don't do it right, well, that's where people's attention will go, and that you ruin the energy, effort, and investment unless you dial in the details. And that's where people think, well, John, I did Giftology, it didn't work. I'm like, no, you didn't follow the recipe. You missed something. You forgot an ingredient. It's not, I'm not saying it to be mean, because we forget ingredients too sometimes, but don't expect to get the response and the 100x referrals and all these other things if you don't dial in the details of the recipe.
And I'm going to totally mess up a story that I heard recently, and hopefully I get it somewhat right here. But I heard this story about, it was a manufacturing plant and something wasn't working properly, and they hired this expert to come in, and he reviews it for a little bit, and he takes this hammer and he hits it in this certain spot and it works. And he's like, that'll be $1,000. And the guy's like, what? $1,000? It only took 10 minutes, but it was, $10 for the labor for me to swing, and it was $990 for the experience and knowledge, the strategy of where to hit.
Yeah, 50 years sometimes, or 20 years. It's like, when you're hiring an expert, it's like, I think there's a similar story with like Picasso, like drawing something on a napkin in like 30 seconds and being like, hey, it's 10 grand. And it's like, 10 grand took you 10 seconds. And it's like, no, it took me, 40 years to get to the point where I could do that in 10 seconds. And so, and lawyers are the same way. It's like, why am I paying, a third of the, the case? Or why am I paying $1,000 an hour for your time? Or why am I paying, it's like, like I invested the time to go to this law school, and I've been practicing for 27 years, and we have this team of people. And, if you want to save, 10 grand here, that might end up costing you $500,000 in your settlement. Like, is that a risk you want to take? Do you want to hire the best? It could be worth an extra $500,000. And so there's so many times in business, especially with gifting, because it feels like this woo-woo, warm, fuzzy, who cares? And people don't realize that, like, they think they're saving money by going to Harry and David or going to Amazon or whatever. And I'm like, that's fine. But if relationships matter to you, and one relationship could be worth $1 million to you, do you really want to cut corners on how you're showing gratitude to those relationships? And yes, you saved $100, but people, it's that falling over, tripping over dollars to save pennies. They're like, oh, I save a penny here and a penny there. And I'm like, dude, like, focus on what you're good on, or what you're good at, and either do gifting and relationship building really, really, really well and invest in those relationships, or just cut it out. But don't go halfway, because oftentimes you're going to spend money to actually have a negative consequence. And that's the last investment you want to make as a business leader or owner in any industry, is not realizing what that cutting the corners is actually costing you.
Totally. And I want to respect your time, and I want to ask you just a couple fun personal questions, and then we'll get to our 3 for 3 at the end here. And I wanted to ask you this because you were the gifting king, and among your friends and family, your circle of influence, when you are gifting someone, are you held to this much bigger standard? So do you catch a lot of heat?
Well, imagine my wife knows every hack, secret sauce trick. She knows everything. She's like, I'm the vision relationship guy. I'm the marketing sales guy. My business partner is the operations finance guy. My wife, same way. She's type A driven, but she's very very dialed in on the details. And so she's the hardest person for me to gift. I have to bring my A game. But even with other people, it's like, Yeah, I mean, when you're the gifting guy and you're playing Santa Claus year round for, whether it's small businesses or Fortune 100 brands, the expectations are through the roof. And so it's one thing when the expectations, you're a sucky gifter and your expectations are a 2 out of 10. It's not hard to get to be a 3 out of 10. But if your expectations are a 10 out of 10, you got to consistently deliver 11s and 12s. Oh, dude, it's for my kids. Like I'm buying, like my daughter just turned 5 and she loved Frozen. And so I went out and bought like this 7-foot tall, life-size professional Olaf costume to show up as a surprise. Last year, I like dressed up as Maui with painted chest to show up at the party. So yeah, I mean,
that's awesome.
And part of it is I like it. Like I like the shock and awe and the surprise, but there's no mailing it in. People call me out on it, whether it's, in business or personally. Like you got to bring, like when I give a coffee cup, there's these coffee cups. I used to make fun of coffee cups. I give $1,000 coffee cup. You're like $1,000 for a coffee cup. I'm like, well, it takes 4 weeks to make. It's called an artifact mug. I've given it to all my employees, all my clients, mentors. I've given out about 110 of them. Carved into it is somebody's whole life story, their faith, their family, who mentored them first, their tragedies they've overcome. It's like a lifetime achievement award that it's a usable piece of art. Most people drink coffee or tea. So when I give a coffee cup, it's not the one from Walmart for $7 from China. It's the $1,000 one that comes in a custom wood case with a video screen from the artist telling a story. So the expectations for me and also our clients, like we set the bar high, and then you and then you exceed it. Like that's just in any business, like the bar keeps raising. Like that's just normal. And you got to find creative ways on how to exceed it. But if you do, there's a reward to that. Personally,
absolutely. And I was thinking that coffee mug, like a lot of times people get coffee mugs because it makes them feel good. It's, like whether they're a cat person, and like I'm a big Star Wars nerd, and I'm holding the Star Wars coffee mug because I grab it out. It makes me feel good, that nostalgia. And so I love that idea. It's just incredible. And, as we close up, we have this new segment. It's called a 3 for 3. It's just a quick fire round. And you're probably going to recognize this first question just because of what we do, but let's just jump into this. So what is your favorite search engine optimization tip?
My favorite search engine optimization tip is to outsource that to companies like ad. I have a company that specializes in that, who's like one of my best friends. They own a company. And so when you search John Ruhlin, they've made sure that there's great articles in Inc., Forbes, Fast Company, and that we show up on all the listicles, so that the small farm boy from Ohio can play at a global level.
Nice. And you can mention their name. That's okay. No hate here.
Yeah. John Hall, John Rampton at Adigy is who we've used for a long time. And if you don't show up on Google properly, then you don't exist.
Awesome. And which entrepreneur do you admire the most?
I mean, the person who comes to mind is Elon Musk. It's probably a common answer. And just because of the kahunas that dude has to put it all on the line consistently in all areas of his life. I'm sure he's not a fun person necessarily to work for, but from an outside perspective, a guy who says one thing and then follows through on it, hard to not respect that.
Yeah, just incredible. And what is the next thing on your bucket list?
So one of the things I love the book, The 5 Love Languages. Gary Chapman's a mentor. And so I'm trying to co-author, he sold 22 million of that book.
Wow.
Over 30 years as a Christian marriage book, which is just crazy. It's like it's being published in Saudi Arabia, but crazy places that it shouldn't be. I want to write the 5 love languages with him for business, because I really feel like that's kind of the next evolution of what we're teaching in our done for you service. So that's the hope is that'll be the next book.
Well, that's incredible. And when that comes out, let me know, and we'll have you back on to talk about it.
Cool. Awesome.
Well, John, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really respect your time, and we'll link everything up in the show notes. And thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chris.